Today I want to talk about what I'm going to call the snowball effect of language learning. And the reason I'm talking about it today is that I suddenly realized that, I was leafing through this new history book that I'm reading about the history of Czechoslovakia, the Czech lands, so to speak. And, I'm just able to read more and more of it. And I grabbed my old copy of, the Osudy Dobreho Vojaka Švejka, where, when I first started on this, working on Link and having to look up every second word and not understanding much of what I listened to, it was hard going. But now I can pretty well, like I haven't read the book because I'm still working on it, with the help of Link, but I can open it up just about anywhere, and I can actually make sense of most of what I read in the book here. And it's a nice, thick, hardcover book. When I listen to any number of the podcasts from Czech radio, and there are so many from Český rozhlas, and I can understand most of what they're talking about. Názory, argumenti, or whatever it is. Argumenti a názory. I don't know. I can understand most of it. And so it made me realize that, the more you understand, the more you can learn. So that, whereas listening to some of this before would have just been background noise, I now have enough of it. I have enough words, and I'm used to it enough that I'm actually able to just put it on in the background and actually learn from it. So that it's this whole sense, and I've described this before, of the sort of, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The more words you have, the more you can learn, the more you can infer. Just as in our own native language, the more vocabulary we have, the more difficult material we can learn, the more we can improve our language skills through input activities. And I make this point because, I must admit that I don't do a lot of speaking in Czech. I occasionally talk to some of our tutors, particularly with Yarda. I might do it once or twice a week, then I might go a couple of weeks without doing it. I'm going to try to get back to doing it. But when I speak, of course, I have a very limited vocabulary. But when I'm listening and reading and working through content at Link, I'm constantly increasing my vocabulary. And so the snowball is moving. I met today with a friend of mine who is an Italian Canadian who speaks very limited Italian. And for 13 years, he's been going to the same town in Italy, in Calabria. And he spends a month there, and he says he wants to learn Italian, and he's learned enough that he can say a few things to he has a good friend there in Italian, and he speaks to his parents, and he can kind of say very, very simple things. But the biggest problem, he says, is that when they start speaking, he doesn't understand what they're saying. He can't understand the radio. He can't understand any of the background. He can't pick up the language from all the stuff that's easily accessible. So his snowball is very small. And I was trying to persuade him that, don't worry about what you can say at this point. Worry about starting to make that snowball bigger. Worry about building up your comprehension, building up your vocabulary. And then once that starts to happen, then you can learn from the newspaper, you can learn from books, you can learn from listening to the radio. So many more things are going to help you. So, and I think too, for example, here in Canada, the government recently announced that they're going to insist on, English language requirements for immigrants. And of course, typically there was some guy who wrote in the local Chinese paper, I read, that this is anti-Asian, and and of course drags in the head tax and everything else he can think of. It's not. It just makes sense because you need English to operate here. But the government is only asking for level 4 on the Canadian benchmarks, which is really quite low. So I'm going to try to meet with some immigrants who are struggling with English and try to persuade them that they've got to build up their comprehension skills. They've got to get the snowball going. I mean, eventually we have to speak. Eventually we have to speak. And when we speak, we struggle. But the bigger your snowball, the more words you have, the more you understand, the more comfortable you are with different aspects of the language, the better you're going to do when you start to speak. So rather than trying to sort of, if I might say, build a very small, perfect little snowman out of the little bit that you have, I believe, and I mean, we all go at these things differently, But for me, I'd far rather just let my snowball run down that hill, get as big as it can possibly be. And then, when circumstances permit, or when I have the opportunity or the need, then I start into more aggressive speaking. And yeah, I have to speak a lot in order to be able to speak well, but if I have a big snowball behind me, it's going to carry me forward. So there you have it, the snowball of language learning.